the necessary decisions to help families with the cost of living and protect the public finances. I'm clear-eyed about my response to the current situation. My economic approach will both be responsive to a changing world and responsible in the national interest. The economic impact of the situation in the Middle East will depend, of course, on its severity and its duration. The movements that we have already seen are likely to put upward pressure on inflation in the coming months. But I also want to confirm to the House that our financial markets are functioning, and I'm in regular touch with the Governor of the Bank of England. This afternoon, I spoke with G7 finance ministers, setting out my priorities for the international cooperation needed. First, calling for immediate de-escalation and a return to the diplomatic process. Second, we must guarantee the security of vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Third, I stand ready to support a coordinated release of collective International Energy Agency oil reserves. And fourth, the UK will play its part as the global hub of maritime insurance. And I am meeting with the Chair of Lloyd's of London later today, where we will discuss how best to support the continued passage of maritime trade. I want to ensure the country that the fundamentals of Britain's economy are strong. Every step that I have taken since the election has built our national resilience, stability in the public finances, investment in infrastructure, in both defence and energy security, and reform to our economy. Last week, I updated the House about our progress in delivering that plan. We have cut inflation so that it is now at 3%, a lower base than at the outset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I have prioritised economic growth to drive up living standards, and I have stabilised the public finances. We have already reduced the deficit by £20 billion since last year, from 5.2% to 4.3% of GDP. We are due to reduce borrowing more over the rest of this Parliament and by more than any other G7 economy. And I have increased our financial buffers, confirmed last week by the Office for Budget Responsibility. I know that families and businesses will be concerned about the impact of this conflict on them, and so I want to set out the action we have already taken and will take to protect them. I'm prioritising energy security, investing in clean, homegrown energy. Our contracts for difference are already protecting consumers, ensuring that generators of low-carbon energy pay money back into the system when the wholesale prices are high, shielding bill payers from fossil fuel price shocks. I can confirm to the House that in the coming days we will publish the government's response to the Finkelton review of nuclear regulation to build nuclear power more quickly. Our energy system is now more secure than it was at the outset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In 2025, the UK imported 17% less gas than we did in 2021. And while gas generation is estimated to have set the wholesale price of electricity in Britain around 90% of the time in the early 2020s, this has now fallen by around a third. What this means is that we are less reliant on and less exposed to volatile international energy prices than we were at the outset of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and that is welcome. I recognise the role that North Sea oil and gas will play in our economy for years to come. Last week, I met with North Sea industry leaders to discuss their role in jobs, investment and growth, and in energy supply. The Energy Profits Levy currently remains in place, and the Electricity Generator Levy will also be activated if prices remain at high levels. I have set out the details of our successor regime to the Energy Profits Levy, the Oil and Gas Price Mechanism, balancing providing certainty to business with fairly taxing windfall profits from energy companies. I have also taken direct action on energy bills. Our supercharger discount on business electricity is increasing next month, cutting costs for around 500 of the most energy-intensive businesses by an additional £420 million per year. We are supporting the lowest income families by investing £15 billion in our Warm Homes plan to improve the energy efficiency of people's homes and reduce their bills. And through the Warm Homes discount, taking £150 off bills for 6 million of the lowest income households. That is a doubling of the number of people who will receive the Warm Home discount compared with those plans that the previous government had. That is in addition to the £117 price drop in the price cap that Ofgem have confirmed from next month, thanks to the wider action on bills that I took in the budget. I want to be clear to families at home that despite the movements we have seen in energy prices in the last few days, the price cap for domestic bills for April will not change, giving families immediate certainty on their bills until at least the end of June. However, I recognise that households who use heating oil face unique challenges, and so I have asked the Financial Secretary to the Treasury to lead discussions with officials and with rural and Northern Irish MPs to explore further action that we can take, and those meetings will happen on Wednesday. The current conflict only increases the importance of the action I took at the budget to reduce energy bills. A rapid de-escalation in the Middle East remains the best way to protect us from rising energy bills. But as the situation continues to unfold, my priorities will continue to be helping families with the cost of living and protecting the public finances. I'm also taking action to ensure that people pay the lowest possible price at the pump. In November, I extended the 5p per litre cut in fuel duty for a further 5 months and ensured that fuel duty will not increase in line with inflation this year. Petrol is more than 8p per litre cheaper today than it would have been under the plans that we inherited at the election. And that discount increases to 11p per litre next month once that extension takes effect. The new cheap fuel finder that I confirmed at the budget is currently being delivered, helping consumers find the cheapest price for their fuel. Almost 90% of petrol retailers have already registered for this. And last week, I instructed my officials to accelerate the integration of the cheaper fuel finder with MAP applications. This week, I am meeting with petrol forecourt operators, and I will not hesitate to call out retailers who fail to provide data to the fuel finder. I am clear that the best way to keep prices at the pump low is rapid de-escalation, and I will continue to monitor prices as the situation develops. I have also asked the Competition and Markets Authority to be vigilant across prices, including essentials like road fuel and heating oil. Let me be absolutely clear. I will not tolerate any company exploiting the current crisis to make excess profits at consumers' expense. I am proud to be the Chancellor that is delivering the biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. And I am committed to giving our military the resource that they need. That is why I can confirm today that I approved access for the Ministry of Defence to the Special Reserve to deploy additional capabilities in the Middle East, meaning that no net additional costs of these operations will be funded by the MOD, but instead will be funded by the Treasury. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, we don't yet know how long the conflict will last or what further action will be required. But it is my duty to be responsive in an uncertain world and responsible in the national interest, to protect the public finances and help families with the cost of living. That is what the Prime Minister is doing. That is what I will continue to do. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Chancellor for advanced sight of her statement and add our firm support for our armed forces. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Chancellor has made clear, These are very serious and concerning times, and the developments in the Middle East are already having profound consequences for our economy. Oil prices have surged above $100 a barrel for the first time since the 2022 energy crisis. That alone is enough to have huge knock-on effects for households and businesses. Families filling up their car will already have noticed petrol prices increasing. Fixed-price energy tariffs have either been increased or pulled from the market. So we are already seeing British households worse off as a result of this conflict. I'm grateful to the Chancellor for updating the House on the meetings with other G7 finance ministers, and I welcome her commitment to support action to ease pressure on global supply by using strategic oil reserves. That, however, will only go so far. As the Chancellor said, the longer this conflict continues, the more likely it is that we will see a sustained period of higher prices. Of course, that in turn will also have implications for interest rates and for our cost of borrowing. The longer this lasts, the more likely it is that higher inflationary expectations become anchored. If that happens, monetary policy will need to adjust accordingly, which may mean higher mortgages for homeowners who have only just begun to see some relief. And of course, gilt markets have already been responding to these events, which could mean that forecasts we were given just last week from the OBR end up looking very, very different. We must continue to monitor developments closely. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, where we on this side of the House clearly differ with the Right Honourable Lady is in her approach to the economy in the run-up to this crisis. Her gross mismanagement has left us far more vulnerable than would otherwise have been the case. Inflation, to which she refers, was bang on target when we left office, but thanks to the Right Honourable Lady's choices, it rose back up to almost 4% last year, the highest in the G7. And inflation remains elevated. That is far from ideal, given the threat of a significant further spike in energy prices. And of course, extraordinarily, the Chancellor has just now reconfirmed that the government will press ahead with a rise in fuel duty later this year. And borrowing is running higher than was forecast when the government took office. We are spending well over $100 billion a year on debt interest alone. That leaves us far more vulnerable to rising borrowing costs. And the government, of course, is continuing to impose ruinously high taxes on our oil and gas sector and choosing to rely on imports instead of maximising our own domestic energy supply. That is proving to be an incredibly short-sighted approach. But as the Right Honourable Lady has just told us, there will be no change in direction. That is the wrong choice. And more broadly, of course, business confidence has hit record lows and unemployment has risen back to pandemic levels. So our economy is weaker as a direct result of this Chancellor. Now, last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the spring statement, the Right Honourable Lady had an opportunity to change course, but instead we got no action at all. Just breathtaking self-congratulation and denial. She had a vital opportunity to come to this House with a plan to get the economy growing. But she did not do that, not least because this week government have caved into their own backbenchers who prefer higher welfare spending over fixing our economy. So today, let me reiterate our offer to support the government if, even at this late stage, and particularly given the gravity of the current global outlook, they do the right thing, show some backbone, and come forward with a proper plan to cut welfare spending and strengthen our economy so we can properly support hard-working families through this difficult time. This is the very least that the British people deserve. Finally, Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Right Honourable Lady, will she urgently reconsider her decision to implement the first increase in fuel duty in 15 years? Likewise, to urgently reconsider her decision to continue with the crippling taxes being imposed on North Sea oil and gas producers? On the Fingleton review on nuclear, can she clarify if the government is accepting all those recommendations as ministers previously committed to do? Can she give further details on what additional economic action is under consideration internationally if the conflict continues? What measures is the government considering to support households in the event of a sustained period of higher prices, and what action is being considered as part of the Financial Secretary's work to support those reliant on heating oil? Are the government tracking the Iranian regime's illegal funding sources to ensure UK financial systems are not facilitating funds that are being used to support repression? And can she confirm that there is sufficient resource available in the Special Reserve so that our brave servicemen and women have the support they deserve?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for his questions. The Government believes that the best way that we can protect families and businesses from this conflict is through de-escalation. And we heard nothing in the Shadow Chancellor's response about what the opposition's view is on de-escalation. We believe that it's important that we get back to the negotiating table and don't escalate this conflict. I'm not that sure that that is the view of the opposition party. But we also know that commitment to greater energy security can help guard against shocks. And after inaction and delay from the Conservatives when they were in government for 14 years, this Labour government is committed to investing and building new nuclear, and that's why we're backing Sizewell C and also small modular reactors, both funded at the spending review, neither funded by the previous government, because this government is backing Britain's energy security. This Labour government is backing the industry of the future, such as carbon capture and storage, funded at the spending review, not funded by the party opposite, because we back Britain's energy security. And through the National Wealth Fund, we are investing in floating offshore wind and in our docks, funded in the spending review, not funded by the party opposite, because we back Britain's energy security. In 14 years, the Tories did nothing. So they failed when we needed new nuclear. They stood by and allowed the loss of gas storage facilities at Rough. They failed to fix the broken planning system to enable us to build renewables. And they had an effective moratorium on onshore wind, which is the cheapest form of energy. We are taking a different approach in the interest of our economy and energy security. On energy bills, I would urge the Right Honourable Gentleman not to scaremonger. The £150 cut to energy bills that I announced in the budget will continue, as confirmed by Ofgem. We removed the failed eco scheme and we removed a number of levies off of bills. On heating oil, those conversations will happen this week and we are working closely with MPs, with colleagues in Northern Ireland to make sure that things are working well. But the Minister at Desnes met with the heating oil sector on Friday and spoke this morning to the Competition and Markets Authority. There is not currently a problem with supply, but where members have individual issues around supply, they should make sure they get in contact with Desnes. On fuel duty would have risen by 8p compared to if I had have used the plans that I inherited. And we've had two budgets, both of which all of the parties opposite voted against, which extended that freeze in fuel duty. So it's a little bit rich now to hear the opposition saying that they want to reduce fuel duty when they vote against budgets that froze it. And on the energy profits levy, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman has a short memory because, of course, he was in the Cabinet that introduced the energy profits levy. And they introduced it for a reason, because of the windfall profits that were being made by the energy companies and the need to help consumers with bills, which is exactly what we have done. On the public finances, again, I'm not sure if the Right Honourable Gentleman listened either to my statement last week or my statement today. the deficit has reduced from 5.3% to 4.2% of GDP. It's the first time in 6 years that the budget deficit has been less than 5% of GDP. And in fact, in the 14 years that the Conservatives were in office, borrowing was higher than the G7 average. It is now lower than the G7 average, and it's coming down in every year of this Parliament. And on inflation, I'm not going to take any lessons from the party that took inflation to more than 11%. Under policy supported by the party opposite. And on welfare, I've got to say, for the former Work and Pension Secretary to say that we should be spending less on welfare, well, it would have been nice if it had done something about it when he was in charge. We are reforming the welfare system that they broke. And on Finkleton, we commissioned the Finkleton review because we are determined to build nuclear power, unlike the party opposite. On oil reserves, we have 90 days' worth of reserves of oil imports, and as confirmed by the G7 today, we will be making further announcements of that. On gas reserves, it was the party opposite that closed the storage facilities at Rough, and National Gas have confirmed today that our gas reserves are at a comparable level to last year and the year before that, and that the numbers being reported are utterly misleading because gas comes from a number of sources. It comes from the interconnectors, it comes from liquid natural gas, and it comes from our storage facilities. So again, I would really rather that the party opposite didn't scaremonger when people want certainty. On money laundering, of course, we have the very strictest rules around money laundering, and on the special reserve for defence, of course, we will make sure that the Ministry of Defence has all the money it needs for providing the support for our armed forces.
Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Dame Meg Healey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is right to focus on the cost of living and de-escalation in the Middle East. And I'm pleased to hear her confirm again, as she did in her statement, that there is a money for the Ministry of Defence access to the Special Reserve to deploy additional capabilities to the Middle East. Could she give us a figure or a range for how much money the Treasury is providing to the Ministry of Defence to deploy?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
It wouldn't be right to disclose that sort of information, but as I said, we will provide all the support that is needed for our operations in the Middle East.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Chancellor for advance sight of her statement, but the statement does not include a single concrete announcement and in itself won't provide the reassurance that households and small businesses are looking for as they hear reports of energy bills about to escalate. Last week, the Liberal Democrats asked the Chancellor whether she would consider scrapping the planned 1p increase in fuel duty due in September. Could the Chancellor confirm whether that option is still on the table and that it has not been ruled out? Last autumn, we Liberal Democrats called for a new energy security bank to roll out low-interest loans to households and SMEs. We welcomed the government's Warm Homes plan in January, but can the Chancellor confirm that it could be extended from 5 to 10 years, that it will have a greater emphasis on home insulation, and for small businesses, could their investment in energy-saving measures be excluded from business rates calculations? Madam Deputy Speaker, in the long term, we need energy market reform. Can I urge the Chancellor and her government to intervene to stop these unpredictable fluctuations in the gas market? We need to urgently develop a plan to de-link gas and electricity prices and move expensive old renewable subsidies from the renewables obligation to the much better and cheaper contracts for difference model. I'm glad that the Chancellor has written to the CMA about keeping an eye on petrol pumps, but last autumn I wrote to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade and asked him to instruct the CMA to investigate bad practices in the energy market affecting hospitality businesses and small businesses as well. The Federation of Small Businesses and UK Hospitality have also asked for this investigation. 6 months on, it still has not happened. Can the Chancellor please confirm that she will speak to the Secretary of State for Business and Development? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on rural homes, we know that off-grid homes rely on oil. They are seeing prices going up already as panic buying spreads. I'm grateful that the Chancellor has indicated there will be a meeting on Wednesday. Could the Chancellor also then confirm that there will be an announcement forthcoming by the end of this week? Thank you.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady talks about energy security, but she has never once acknowledged her party's failure when they were in government. In 2010, her party's leader, Nick Clegg, justified opposing new nuclear energy on the grounds that it would take until 2022 to become operational. Well, 2022 has been and gone, but what is here is another example of Britain paying the high price today for the choices of the parties opposite. On the specific questions that the Honourable Lady asks, on energy bills, we announced at the budget £150 off energy bills. That comes in April, and it continues until June by taking the failed eco-levy that the last government presided on over off of bills. And on heating oil, people on heating oil also use electricity in their homes and also benefit from reductions in their energy bill from April. But as I said, the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be meeting with the relevant MPs this week. On fuel duty, the Honourable Lady walked with her colleagues through the lobbies to oppose the budget measures, which included freezing those fuel duties. So it's a little bit rich of her now to say that she wants us to cut fuel duty. On ensuring that homes are properly insulated, at the spending review last year, I announced £15 billion for the Warm Homes Plan, focused on lower-income families. On contracts for difference, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right that the contracts for difference are absolutely crucial in weaning ourselves off imported oil and gas, and we are in a better place because of the auctions and the CFDs that we have been doing, and the energy infrastructure which we've been building and can build because of the Planning Infrastructure Act, which the parties opposite opposed. And finally, on the Competition and Markets Authority, as I said in my statement, they've got an important role in ensuring that markets are functioning properly on heating oil, on petrol forecourts, and for small businesses. And we will make sure that they fulfil that role in making sure that people are not overcharged for the energy that they use.
Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Chancellor's commitment to giving us energy security through reducing our dependence on international fossil fuel markets and moving to clean energy instead. Can I also welcome what she said about her support for jobs and investment in the North Sea, and her commitment especially to protecting consumers through the Warm Homes Discount, the Warm Homes Plan, and indeed the commitment she made in the budget to taking £117 off consumer bills. She quite rightly pointed out the dire record of the parties opposite on new nuclear. 14 years where they failed. So will she give the commitment that this government will add to its already announced successes on Sizewell C and on SMR, and give that certainty of policy to the industry through a fleet approach both to large scale and to small modular reactors?
Chancellor.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. Already we have signed off commitment to both Sizewell C, a publicly funded nuclear power station, and also small modular reactors, which we will build with Rolls-Royce in North Wales. And the purpose of the Finkleton review is that we can build those quickly and cheaply as the current situation more than ever demands.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was doing her job, the Treasury rule of thumb was that a 20% increase in energy prices meant 1% more on inflation and 0.5% less on growth. The truth is, it is much too early to know whether she is going to have to find £78 billion to help households with energy bills, as I had to in 2022. But what we do know is that the world is much more dangerous and there are some big problems in our defence budget. I welcome the fact the government is now committed to increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. But nearly 2 years on from when the previous government made the same commitment, it is clear that that is not enough. So will she unblock the arguments between the Treasury and the MOD and outline a timetable whereby defence spending increases to 3% of GDP and we are able to defend our interests in the Middle East and our allies in Europe as this whole House would wish?
Chancellor.
Thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. And I think this point about it being too early to tell the impact is really important. Of course, we will take the necessary actions to protect consumers and businesses. But the most important thing we can do at the moment is de-escalate the conflict and work with Lloyd's of London and with countries around the world to get those vessels flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. That is what is absolutely key for containing the rises in energy prices. On defence spending, in his manifesto, they committed to getting to 2.5% by the end of the Parliament. We're going to get to 2.6% by April next year. Then we've made further commitments to 3% and then 3.5%. Obviously, we've got a spending review coming up next year where these decisions will be taken in the round.
I'm only planning to run this statement until 5:45, so members and indeed the Chancellor can all help each other by asking very short questions, please. John Grady.
I'm obliged, Madam Deputy Speaker. The root cause of this issue in Britain is our excessive reliance on gas. That is why consumers in Glasgow East pay much more for the energy. And the Conservatives had an offshore wind auction with no bids. They had an offshore wind moratorium, and the SNP are against any new nuclear power stations. Would my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, agree with me that we must double down on nuclear, onshore and offshore wind to attack the root cause of our energy costs?
Well, we're building new nuclear in England and we're building new nuclear in Wales. We would love to build new nuclear in Scotland, but that will only be possible with a Labour government in Scotland. On renewables, in auction round 7, we had a very successful auction, and auction round 8 will take place later this year. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to wean ourselves off imported oil and gas and be more secure with our energy supplies here in the UK.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Chancellor has announced today that she's not really making any changes at this point, and she's calling for a de-escalation. But what would she say to my rural constituent who has heating oil and who has a virtually empty tank after a long winter and now is facing a 100% increase in the cost of that heating oil? I didn't hear anything that would help that particular constituent.
As the former Chancellor says, it is too early to know the impact of this, and the key thing is de-escalation and getting vessels flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. And she would have heard what I said about heating oil, that is uniquely affected. People who use heating oil will get the benefits on their electricity bills, but I would urge her to attend the meeting to put the case of her constituent with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury on Wednesday.
Ben Goldsborough.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Chancellor and also the Treasury officials for working very closely with the Labour Rural Research Group to discuss the issues to do with heating oil troubles that we are facing right now, with prices going over 200% in some parts. Can the Chancellor elaborate more on what action will be taken with the Competition and Market Authority to make sure that we're protecting our consumers from these price gouging effects that are going on?
Chancellor.
The point about price gouging is really important, and that is why we have today instructed the Competition and Markets Authority to ensure, whether it is either heating oil or petrol retailers, that they're not taking advantage of this situation to line their own pockets rather than thinking about the consumers who they serve.
Chris Coughlin.
Speaker, the last week has underlined our perilous national security situation and the potential risks to growth. Does the Chancellor agree that now is the time to raise defence spending to 3% of GDP, perhaps funded by borrowing with our European Canadian allies to reassure bond markets, both to drive growth and protect our national security?
Chancellor.
I've got huge respect for the honourable gentleman who's on the Treasury Select Committee, but his party has opposed every increase in taxes that we have brought in to be able to better fund our public services, including higher defence spending. And, you know, like me, he will look at what's happening in financial markets. And I'm not convinced this is the time to unleash more borrowing on markets. That's what Liz Truss tried, and look where it got us.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Chancellor's statement, particularly the focus on energy security and our plan for homegrown clean energy? It has been astonishing since the election to hear that the Conservatives' lessons from the Ukraine crisis was that we needed to be more dependent on international fossil fuels, costing £78 billion, as the former Chancellor just said. The Chancellor mentioned the electricity generator levy. I just wondered if she could tell the House how and when that would be activated.
Chancellor.
I very much thank my honourable friend for his question. The energy profits levy is still in place, and the higher prices go, the more windfall tax is paid. There is also the electricity generators levy, where if electricity prices go up, because they are in some cases outside of contracts for difference linked to gas prices, we will also recoup money there. That is obviously important because if the situation goes badly, we will need to be able to better support consumers. That is why the EPL and the EGL were brought in the first place, and that's why they are important parts of the architecture we have.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
I'm not sure that whether in the middle of the war it achieves much to be overtly party political. I mean, the past is where we were. We're now in the present. So, just to be helpful to the Chancellor, I agree with her on de-escalation as it happens, on defending our interests, not regime change. But the fact is that we have the highest energy costs in Europe. We're now in a crisis, and we're in potentially a war economy. So I saw the Energy Secretary sitting next to her earlier. Whatever the good intentions on net zero, will she listen to the Shadow Chancellor on North Sea oil? Because we are in this crisis now, and we have to meet this crisis with every tool in the toolbox.
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and he's absolutely right. The best way to reduce prices for businesses and families in all of our constituencies is to de-escalate and ensure that vessels can get through the Strait of Hormuz, and that is our focus. But what this crisis, as well as Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, shows us is that we have got to win ourselves off oil and gas. We are better placed now than we were when Russia invaded Ukraine, because we get more of our electricity through contracts for difference than we did then, and we are less reliant on gas prices to set our overall energy prices. But this shows that we need to do more to invest in both nuclear and in homegrown renewables, so we are not so reliant on imports. But as I said in my statement, I met with the North Sea oil and gas leaders last week to talk about how we can support them during this time to make sure that we have access to the reserves that we need.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement? It's vital for residents in Dartford and across the country that they know that the government has their back when it comes to fuel bills going forward. Does the Chancellor agree with me that the economic stability that she set out last week in the spring statement means that the economy and consumers are much less vulnerable to the price shocks coming from the Middle East than they would otherwise be?
We are in a better position than we were when Russia invaded Ukraine for two reasons. First of all, because of our macroeconomic situation. For the first time since 2019, our deficit is below 5% of GDP. It came down by 1 percentage point of GDP just this year, and the OBR forecasts that it falls in every year, which gives us a bit more of a buffer. And of course, I set out how the headroom against the fiscal rules, both the stability rule and the investment rule, had increased at the spring forecast compared to the budget. But the other way in which we are better prepared is that more of our electricity comes from contracts for difference, which are not linked to the volatile and rising gas prices. That means that bills will be less affected. But I'll just come back to the point, it is de-escalation that will have the most impact on my honourable friends' constituents in Dartford and elsewhere in getting their bills down.
Kirsty Blackman.
Families are already struggling with the ongoing cost of living crisis, and the Chancellor has failed to bring down energy bills in the way that was promised in the manifesto. As prices continue to soar and international events cause people real anxiety as they're looking at these situations, they're already struggling, they're already feeling the squeeze in the cost of living as more than they ever have before. Will she now recognise that this is a crisis for families, and will she put in real support to help families through the cost of living crisis?
Chancellor.
I'll just say with respect to the Honourable Lady, on the 1st of April, energy prices will fall by an average of £117 because of the action that I took in the budget. It will be frozen at that point until the end of June. And as the former Chancellor and other members have said, the most important thing we can do now is de-escalate the crisis. But if the Honourable Lady really believes in energy security, she should back Labour's plans to invest in nuclear energy, including the jobs that would create in Scotland.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's announcement, reiteration of the extension of the supercharger scheme, but she will know that that only really helps 10% of energy-intensive industry in this country, and in particular those that are electro-intensive. So with the price per firm in gas pretty much double what it was last week, is she able to set out what help might be available for gas-intensive industry and those electro-industries that aren't in the supercharger scheme? And if the de-escalation doesn't come, that we all hope it does, will she agree to meet with those energy-intensive industries to see how those that are impacted by gas prices can get some immediate relief?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it is a really important point. 500 businesses will benefit from an increased discount through the supercharger, taking that discount from 60% to 90% from April. And next April, the British Industry Competitiveness Scheme comes in, benefiting, I think, around 7,000 businesses. That is set to go from next April, but of course we will continue to look at how we can support our energy-intensive industries if the current situation continues in the Middle East.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given it was promised at the start of June last year, when will the Chancellor sign off on the Defence Investment Plan?
Chancellor.
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I have huge respect for him for the time he spent at the Treasury. As the honourable gentleman knows, the previous government committed to get to 2.5% by the end of this Parliament. We're committing to bring that forward, and by April next year, we will be spending 2.6% of GDP. We will set out the Defence Investment Plan based on the strategic defence review that we did, and of course the previous government didn't even bother to do a strategic defence review.
Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've already got constituents in places like Weardale, Teesdale and Gornless Valley who are paying double for their heating oil to what they would have paid a week ago, and some of them simply can't afford to fill up their tanks. Thanks to the fiscal headroom that this Chancellor has created, there is money in the system to support them. Will she look at things like fixed-term payments in the short term, but also in the longer term, perhaps an expansion of the Warm Homes grant to help them to transition to cheaper forms of fuel?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I set out in my statement, we put £15 billion into the Warm Homes plan at the spending review last year to better insulate people's homes and help them to move to cheaper forms of energy. But I do recognise the immediate problems around heating oil. That's why I've asked the Competition and Markets Authority to look at price gauging, but also why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be meeting with MPs, and I hope that on behalf of his constituents in Bishop Auckland, he will be there next week, on Wednesday.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, since the outbreak of the conflict in the Middle East, heating oil prices have increased by over 100%. It's a harsh reminder that relying on volatile fossil fuel markets leaves households financially vulnerable. Many rural households off the gas grid, like Julian from East Lambrook, aren't protected by the energy price cap. So does she agree that this is unfair on rural communities? And will she take steps to develop a mechanism to protect these householders from damaging global fossil fuel price shocks?
Chancellor.
The first thing I would say to her and also to her constituent and other constituents that almost every house will use electricity for turning on the lights, and they will benefit from some of these changes that come in on the 1st of April. 4% of households in Great Britain rely on heating oil. It's more than 60% in Northern Ireland. We do recognise the unique situation here. The increase in the price in the last few days does not reflect market conditions, which is why we've asked the Competition and Markets Authority to urgently look at extortionate prices and also ensuring that supply remains stable, because there is enough heating oil available, but what we don't want is people to be priced out of it.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome the Chancellor's statement and thank her for the work that she's doing to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Could she say a little bit more about the long-term work she's doing to increase grid capacity and to change the planning system to help invest in new nuclear and in solar?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We made changes to the National Policy Planning Framework just a few days into this government, and at the end of last year we passed the Planning and Infrastructure Act, which makes it easier to build a whole range of infrastructure, from housing to data centres and, crucially, to energy infrastructure. The Planning and Infrastructure Act was opposed by the parties opposite. They need to explain why they're against building the grid connections that will help us to benefit from cheaper energy.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Chancellor that de-escalation is desirable, but the fact is this conflict is likely to go on for many months. And she talks about reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. I can agree with that, but businesses are operating in the here and now. Exactly. And they want some reassurance that the medium-sized business, forget the 500 that are going to benefit from the supercharger. What message can she give to the medium-sized businesses who are very concerned and are currently having to lay off staff?
Chancellor.
I recognise the concerns around businesses, and as well as the supercharger, the BIC scheme is coming in next year, and of course we are monitoring very carefully the situation to see what else might be necessary. But I would say that de-escalation is so important here. There is no reason why this conflict has to go on for months and months. Nobody wants that. It is in no one's interest. We need to quickly get vessels flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. That is why I'm meeting with Lloyd's of London later today to work through what insurance products can be introduced. And it's why on the G7 finance ministers' call this afternoon, we talked about how we can guarantee the safety of vessels flowing through that strait.
Karen Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, tens of thousands of homes across Cornwall are still totally reliant on heating oil. So I'm delighted that the Chancellor has confirmed that the Chief Secretary of State's Treasury will be meeting rural MPs who are disproportionately affected by the crisis. But does she agree with me that in order to accelerate away from a fossil-fuelled economy, the British Business Bank, National Wealth Fund and GB Energy need to take a more dynamic attitude to risk when supporting renewable energy projects?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and can I also thank the rural group of Labour MPs for contacting me over the weekend with their stories and their suggestions, and that is why the Financial Secretary to the Treasurer have been meeting with MPs on Wednesday this week. In terms of the National Wealth Fund and the British Business Bank, they are already investing heavily in renewables, and we increased their budget to be able to do so. I also recognise that there are important opportunities in Cornwall, not just the South Crofty tin mine in his constituency, but other energy projects, including geothermal energy. And I've asked the National Wealth Fund to look again at those opportunities.
Robert Jenrick.
The British people are being clobbered. She could have come here today and scrapped her hike in fuel duty. She could have come here today and ended the insanity and got drilling again in the North Sea. Instead, she offered nothing. Absolutely nothing. This crisis deserves a proper response. When will she finally understand that for now at least she is the Chancellor, not just a bystander?
Chancellor.
Cuts in freezing fuel duty, Reform opposed it. The Energy Profits Levy, he introduced it when he was in the Conservative government, so I'll take no lectures for him, and the Tory Tribute Act sitting up there.
Talk, Will Crichton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement, for her support for the armed forces and for acknowledging the anxiety of constituents abroad. Closer to home, in fact at home, half of my constituents in the Hill and Year outside the town of Strawley rely on heating oil to heat their homes. They face great uncertainty, no guarantee of delivery, no guarantee of price on delivery. I hear what money-saving expert Martin Lewis hears, fears of price gouging and price rises. So I welcome Treasury talks and I hope that they will lead to further scrutiny and regulation of this unregulated industry. Otherwise, I will have to introduce the Chief Financial Secretary of the Treasury to the old Lewis tradition of cutting peat for winter fuel.
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for his question and recognise that his constituency, more than most, will be affected by worries around delivery and price of heating oil. That's why I've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority to look at price gauging, and it's also why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be meeting with my honourable friend and other concerned MPs on Wednesday this week.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I ask the Chancellor, looking forward at the decisions she's making on the strategic reserve being used for defence, will that include the availability for the Royal Navy to prepare warships to go to sea? Clearly, there has been rumour over the last few days that one of the reasons why one of Her Majesty's ships, or His Majesty's ships, sorry, forgive me, is not ready for sea is because the contracts are working 9 to 5. Will she be able to fund this properly so that all ships are available as quickly as possible?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I confirm that there are no financial impediments for warships going to the Middle East, and that money through the the special reserve is absolutely available for personnel and contracts for all of our operations in the Middle East.
Alex Baker.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for the home of the British Army, can I thank the Chancellor for her support for our armed forces. My constituency is also home to innovative defence and aerospace businesses, and many are ambitious to expand and play their part in strengthening our national security, but that depends on being able to access the investment they need to scale up. Can the Chancellor reassure these businesses in my constituency that this government will continue to work closely with the financial sector to ensure British defence and advanced manufacturing companies can access the capital they need to invest, grow and create good, skilled jobs here in the UK?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As my honourable friend knows, we have increased the funding available to both UK Export Finance and the National Wealth Fund to invest and support our defence industry. And also I support the work that my honourable friend and the honourable member for York Outer are doing in ensuring that the financial services sector also lends to defence businesses, including scale-up businesses.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost two-thirds of homes across Brecon, Radnor and Cwm Tower are dependent on heating oil, the price of which is now surging thanks to Donald Trump's decision to bomb Iran. Can she reassure my constituents that help will be on the way from the government?
Chancellor.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that question. The meeting with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be open to all MPs and is on Wednesday this week, and I very much urge him to attend that meeting. We are aware of the unique situation concerning heating oil. That's why I've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority, but are also keen to hear directly from MPs.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The impacts of this conflict spiralling are serious and will fall upon our constituents' pockets. So I welcome the Chancellor's statement and measures to address these. And yet, last week, the Honourable Member for Clapton was in the United States attempting to lobby against our national interests, on this occasion with a comical lack of success. So would my right honourable friend agree that the impact of living costs can only be compounded by the continued, deeply unpatriotic interventions of the benches opposite?
I thank the honourable and gallant, my honourable and gallant friend for his question, and also for his contributions in the debates last week as well. And my honourable and gallant friend knows how important it is to de-escalate because it is our armed services personnel who would be the front line of any escalation of the crisis. And de-escalation, of course, is also in the interests of all of our constituents, whether it is on heating oil, the price paid at the pumps, or indeed on their mortgage rates. And that is why this government is putting all of our diplomatic efforts into de-escalating this crisis and reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Simon Hall.
Speaker, as heating oil prices go up and petrol prices go up in rural North Dorset, my constituents are hearing the Chancellor echo one of her predecessors, I think, effectively saying, crisis, what crisis? She needs to, I think, actively get a grip on this. Motorists in rural areas use their cars because they have to. The vast majority of them are off-grid. They have no alternative to keep warm other than using heating oil. This is a crisis in costs taking place today, which meetings and letters to the CMA are not going to help or address. Can she confirm? She's mentioned that this meeting has been organised on Wednesday and that invitations have gone out for it. Is it? We don't need the honourable member for Swansea West gesticulating like some string.
Order. The question is far.
Forgive me. Sorry.
Too long. Chancellor.
I've got huge respect for the honourable member, and I thank him for his question. As the former Chancellor of the Exchequer says, it is too early to know what the impact of this crisis is going to be. It's why today I met with G7 Finance Minister colleagues, which I'm sure he welcomes, where we discussed the release of the International Energy Agency strategic oil reserves, for example, because what is needed to contain prices for all of our constituents is to make sure that we have the oil and gas on the market that we need, and that is why we are prioritising those diplomatic routes to de-escalate this crisis.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for his statement because this is not just a worrying time for our national security but for our economy too. I am pleased to hear about the work that's going on with the Competition and Markets Authority in respect of consumers of heating oil. But perhaps I could suggest to her that she has a conversation with her colleagues in Desnes to expedite the £1 billion worth of community energy investment coming through the local power fund and focus that investment as quickly as possible into rural areas like mine in Derbyshire, because if this is going to be a protracted conflict, that's something that could make a difference.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I put in £1 billion for the Community Investment Fund in local energy schemes in the spending review last year to make sure that communities are more self-reliant for their basic energy needs. That is a lesson from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it is also the lesson of this conflict in the Middle East, that we need to be more resilient, more secure as an economy, and that is exactly what we are doing.
Healey Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Iran crisis highlights the urgent need to speed up the UK's energy system transition to clean, green, cheap renewables and energy efficiency. Now, the last time that energy prices went through the roof due to illegal international aggression in 2022, normal people paid the price while huge energy giants raked in billions of pounds in windfall profits. So will the Chancellor guarantee that in responding to this crisis now, she'll do everything possible to protect ordinary households and ensure that no energy company makes profits from this war?
I thank the honourable lady for that question. Well, the reason why we have the Energy Profits Levy and also the Electricity Generators Levy is to ensure just that. But if the honourable lady is really serious about energy security and investing in low-carbon energy, I really don't understand why her party opposes the planning reform so we can build the grid infrastructure and opposes both small modular reactors and also new nuclear in Suffolk. All of those things add to our energy security and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Why do the Greens oppose it?
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I respect the Conservatives opposite, who are calling for de-escalation, but they need to have a word with their leader, who wanted to sign Britain up to a war of choice with changing goals and no clear timescales, thereby contributing to the chaos and the worsening cost of living crisis. the Chancellor has a plan and we're seeing inflation, interest rates and government borrowing falling as a result. Will she commit to keeping to that plan, to keep bringing down borrowing so that the country can live more within its means and get rid of the awful inheritance left by the Conservatives?
Yeah. Yes, last week's spring forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility showed inflation coming down, borrowing coming down and debt coming down. Our economy is fundamentally strong, but we all need to see a de-escalation of this conflict and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to ensure that our constituents continue to benefit from falling energy bills and falling interest rates, and that is why we're so focused on the diplomatic efforts.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
As the Chancellor has repeatedly said, at the root of the current economic crisis lies the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. So what conversations has the government had with the Trump administration, both about insurance, but more importantly, about deploying UK military assets to secure the reopening of the Straits? And would she agree with me that a more robust approach might reassure our friends and allies in the Gulf who invest so much in the United Kingdom and where our presence has been noted in its absence?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. There are two things that are needed to reopen or effectively reopen the Strait. The first is security for vessels passing through it, and that will require a cross-country action involving, of course, the US, but also the UK, France, and we all stand ready to do that, and that was one of the things that we discussed on our G7 finance ministers' call today. But once that is provided, we also need to make sure that there are appropriate insurance products in place. We're working again with Lloyds and with the US administration. We are the global leader in maritime insurance, and so we've got an important role to play to ensure that those vessels are properly insured once they do start to move again.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has taken decisive action to bring down energy bills, but as she noted, those who rely on heating oil are often the most exposed to sudden price shocks. Even in my fairly urban constituency, there are hundreds of households in this position, and some have been in touch with me because the cost of heating oil has doubled in a week due to the effect of the Iran conflict. So as the Chancellor works to shield the British public from the economic fallout, will she make sure households on heating oil are protected from the shocking increases we're currently seeing?
It is important that the players in the heating oil sector behave responsibly and do not seek to profiteer from this current conflict because it is their customers who will lose out, which is why we've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority to guard against that price gorging. I know that he will attend the meeting with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury on Wednesday to make those representations, but the best thing that we can do is to de-escalate and get those vessels flowing to get that oil and gas moving.
Helen Morgan.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 3 households in North Shropshire are dependent on heating oil, and I declare an interest because mine is one of them. People have been in contact with me since last week, concerned about the rapid escalation of heating oil costs. I welcome the Chancellor's announcement that she recognises that problem and wants to act on it. Can she outline in more detail what kind of remedy she's envisaging and how soon we might be able to see it put in place?
Chancellor.
I said in my statement that despite what we did in the budget last year to take £150 off domestic energy bills, there is a unique situation with regard to heating oil. That's why I was pleased to receive representations over the weekend on it. The Treasury are working through those proposals, and it's why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will meet with MPs this week. But the reason why prices are going up is because of the challenges in getting oil and gas out of the Middle East. That's why it's so important to de-escalate, but it is wrong for anyone to profiteer off the back of this crisis.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents stranded in the Middle East have been left out of pocket because of their travel insurance, and in my view as a former regulator, they have overly broad exclusion terms in those policies. So would my right honourable friend update the House on her meetings with the insurance sector, the FCA and consumer groups, and would she agree for the City Ministers to meet me to discuss this?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I'm sure that the relevant minister, whether that is in the Department for Transport or indeed the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, meets with my honourable friend. It is important that everybody who wants to get home from the Middle East is able to do so. We welcome the work that the airlines are doing to get people home with the support of the government, but it's also important that people are not ripped off for that.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard the Chancellor and others on the government front bench for months now saying that we'll be using oil and gas for years to come, and of course we will. No matter how much they wish that away now, we'll be using oil and gas for years to come. We must secure our supply. In her meeting this morning with G7 finance ministers, does any of them say that banning new oil and gas licences from the North Sea is a good idea? Or any of them banning themselves from their own energy resources?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable lady for that question. It was, of course, her own party that introduced the energy profits levy in the first place, and introduced it for a good reason, because many of the questions today have been about the impact on prices, and of course the way that support was given to consumers during the Russia-Ukraine crisis was through money from the energy profits levy then being used to subsidise people's bills. That's why we have the energy profits levy.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement today? She is absolutely right to take the action that she has on energy prices, particularly given that 20% of the world's oil is transported via the Straits of Hormuz. However, the Straits of Hormuz also transports over a third of the world's urea, almost half of its sulphur, and a significant amount of ammonia. So can I ask the Chancellor what steps she's taking to protect our farmers from spiking fertiliser prices at the same time as energy prices are rising?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We're working closely with DBT and DEFRA as well as business to understand the different parts of industry that will be affected by a protracted conflict. But this is just another reason why it is so important to de-escalate. That is exactly what we are seeking to do, and it is also why we are working with G7 allies focused on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, because that's the best thing we can do to bring down prices and ensure supply continues to flow.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome a statement this afternoon from the Chancellor. As she's already outlined, Northern Ireland is uniquely exposed. Up to 70% of people right across Northern Ireland are reliant on home heating oil. Instead of meeting with me, would you be able to tell me that you have plans to meet with the Minister of Economy in Northern Ireland this week, and indeed my ministerial colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive, to see how we can best support our people?
Chancellor.
It's really important to understand the extent of the impact on Northern Ireland. When we made this announcement of the budget, we did make money available for Northern Ireland to have their own scheme, recognising the slightly different energy market in Northern Ireland. I know that the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, who's leading on this work at the Treasury, is meeting with his opposite numbers in the Northern Ireland Executive to make sure that we understand the challenges there and what we can do to best support.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for her statement, which really does underline the importance of new nuclear to boost our energy security. Many of us who back new nuclear also care deeply about nature, and Dungeness in my constituency is both a nationally important habitat site and a vital location for new nuclear. So does the Chancellor agree that we urgently need a reformed framework for habitat protection along the lines proposed by Fingleton Review, so we can safeguard the environment and welcome new nuclear back to places like Dungeness?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and also his pragmatic approach. We will be responding to Finkleton in the next few days, and then legislating as quickly as possible to make it cheaper and quicker to build the energy infrastructure that we know we need.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, defence industry supply chains really are desperately in need of the DIP. The Chancellor talks about the money that's being invested, but why is the Treasury not allowing the DIP to go forward? Because it's starting to become really critical, and we need that infrastructure. Secretary of State is desperate for that infrastructure. We need to know when's that coming forward. It was the government's self-imposed deadlines, nobody else's.
Well, we published the Strategic Defence Review earlier this year, and in the spending review last year, the biggest uplifts in spending were at the Ministry of Defence and at the Department of Health. The previous government said they were going to get to 2.5% at the end of the next Parliament. We're going to get to it to 2.6% by April next year, and that money is already being spent. He doesn't need to worry about that.
Peggy Shanker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that my constituents in Derby will be worried about the devastation that they see across the Middle East and will agree that de-escalation must remain a priority. But they're also worried about the impact on their weekly shopping bills, their petrol prices and their energy bills. Will the Chancellor agree with me that stability for our businesses and local people is absolutely vital given the volatility that we're seeing internationally?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. That's why I'm pleased that since I became Chancellor, the Bank of England have cut interest rates 6 times, why we were able to take £150 off of energy bills and also freeze prescription charges and rail fares. And of course, in my honourable friend's constituency, you have Rolls-Royce, who will benefit both from small modular reactors and also the increased defence spending that is already going in.
Ben Lake.
72% of households in Ceredig and Preseli do not have a connection to the mains gas grid. And for those who fill their tanks over the weekend, the consequences of the Iran crisis have become very, very real. For those who are still to do so, they're very anxious to learn of when any potential support that might be agreed on Wednesday will be brought forward.
Chancellor.
I recognise that there are significant challenges in some areas of Wales, as indeed there is in Northern Ireland, and I very much encourage the honourable gentleman to attend the meeting with the Financial Secretary to Treasury. We have already had representations over the weekend about what is needed, but I want MPs from all parties to be able to contribute to that. But the best way to reduce prices is getting that oil and gas flowing again, which is why it's so important to have both a military solution to get the Strait of Hormuz open, but also an insurance solution, which is what I'm working very closely on at the moment.
Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement this afternoon, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over. I appreciate a lot of members will be disappointed not to have got in this afternoon. I will try to prioritise them in the next statement, if at all possible. Which brings us to a statement from the Secretary of State for Defence.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to make a statement to update the House on the Middle East. And there's a lot to update, and I trust the House will understand. I want to start by praising our armed forces, who are working 24/7 to protect British lives and British interests in the region. From our 400-strong air defence teams in Cyprus, who I visited last week, to our counter-drone specialists in Iraq, our fast jet pilots in Qatar, our command specialists in the regional defence coordination centres, and everyone working on this crisis abroad and at home. Iran threatens us all, but it's our forces who feel this most acutely. So I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking them for their outstanding dedication and for their professionalism. For protecting British lives, for keeping us safe, we want to say to them, you are the best of Britain in action. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK's government approach throughout the current developments in the Middle East is founded on 3 principles. First, defensive, taking the necessary action to strengthen our collective defence. So we took steps from January, weeks before this current war with Iran began, to pre-position Typhoons, F-35s, counter-drone teams, radars and defence in the region, as well as the additional military capability we've sent since last Saturday, when the Iranian retaliation attacks started. Second, coordination with allies. We do not work alone, so we're leading and coordinating our response with NATO allies and other partners, including the US, E5 nations and the Gulf states. And I'm in daily contact with my counterparts, just as the Chief of Defence Staff is at 2. And third, Madam Deputy Speaker, our third principle is legal. We must have a legal basis for our decisions. That allows ministers to make sound choices. It allows our military to operate with the fullest confidence. And our UK action is grounded in these principles to protect British people, protect British bases, to protect British allies. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last week, we've seen Iran lashing out with dangerous, indiscriminate and reckless strikes. In the first day alone, they attacked 10 countries with military and civilian targets attacked, including hotels in Dubai and Bahrain and the Kuwaiti National Airport. British troops stationed at a US base in Bahrain were within a few hundred yards of an Iranian strike, and a small drone hit our base in Cyprus coming from Lebanon or Iraq. And Iraq has now fired over 500 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,000 drones. Thank you to the Honourable Gentleman. Iran has now fired over 500 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,000 drones. I'm grateful to him for paying attention to my statement quite so closely. And even after the Iranian president's apology and promise to the Gulf states over the weekend, Iran still then struck multiple countries with drones and missiles, including Bahrain, where 32 civilians were injured in one attack and a desalination plant was hit in another. We totally condemn these attacks. They're putting hundreds of thousands of people at risk, including British nationals and members of our armed forces. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, while Iran's current indiscriminate strikes began last Saturday, this Iranian regime has for decades been a source of evil, exporting violence across the Middle East and beyond. It supplied nearly 60,000 Shahid drones to Putin for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Here in the UK, they conduct aggressive cyber attacks against us and have plotted assassination on Britain's streets. The Iranian regime is a destructive force which has slaughtered protesters in its own streets and inflicts terrible suffering, especially against its own people. We want to see Iran stop their strikes, give up their nuclear ambitions and restart the negotiations. And as Defence Secretary, my number one priority is protecting British people, military and civilian alike. Since January, we've moved significant military assets into the region ahead of those first US-Israeli strikes. And those preparations made a real difference. It meant we've conducted defensive military operations from day one. Our F-35s destroying Iranian drones over Jordan. Our Typhoons shooting down targets heading to Qatar. Our counter-drone units defeating further attacks against coalition bases in Iraq. We acted early to protect British people and British interests and to support our allies. And as the Iranian response became clear from last weekend, we adapted our actions to the changing circumstances, driven at all times by military advice. So that's why we agreed a new US request for the use of British bases at RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia last Sunday. And that's why I committed further resources to the region last week, including 4 extra Typhoons, 3 Wildcat helicopters, a Merlin helicopter and HMS Dragon. And I can confirm today that Dragon will set sail in the next couple of days. And I want to personally thank all those who are working tirelessly, some 22 hours a day, to get that ship ready. HMS Dragon will join US air defence destroyers to provide additional protection in the eastern Mediterranean. And Madam Deputy Speaker, let me also provide the House with the following operational update from last night. The UK is now conducting defensive air sorties in support of the UAE. Typhoons successfully took out 2 drones, one over Jordan, the second heading to Bahrain. The third Wildcat has now arrived in Cyprus, and we've now deployed additional RAF operations experts in more than 5 countries in the region, helping coordinate regional military and civilian airspace. And the fragments of that drone that hit Akrotiri are being analysed for foreign military hardware by our experts at DSTL. British pilots have now racked up over 230 flying hours. We have 8 jets in Qatar, including our joint Qatari-British squadron, who are flying in support of regional allies, and we have more jets in Cyprus than any other nation. And I visited our 400-strong air defence teams at our base in Cyprus on Thursday last week. They're there in addition to the 4,000 personnel regularly stationed on the island. I was subjected to the daily air sirens that they face. I saw the impact that Iranian proxy drone had caused, and I asked the Commander of British Forces, General Tom Buick, "Do you need anything more from us back in Britain?" And he said to me, "No, I've been given everything I have asked for." The UK is leading this response to Iranian threats in close coordination with our allies. And Cyprus's head of the National Guard told me last week, our military cooperation has never been closer. And our support is backed up by our NATO allies, including the US, France, Greece and Germany, something I discussed with E5 defence ministers last week. And I can also confirm to the House that having given the US the go-ahead to use British bases for specific defensive operations into Iran last Sunday, the first US bomber landed at RAF Fairford on Friday. And as the Prime Minister has set out, this activity is part of, I quote, the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. It is in accordance with international law. These missions are to destroy Iranian missiles at source. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we are deeply concerned about escalation in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a dangerous terror organisation tied to the regime in Iran. It must cease these attacks against Israel. But we do not want to see Israel expand this conflict further into Lebanon. More than 400 have already been killed and 500,000 displaced by recent Israeli operations. The solution to these problems, to this conflict, must be guided by the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. And we urge de-escalation and the return to a negotiated process. Now, I know, moving beyond defence, that many of us as MPs have constituents with friends and family that are caught in the region, worried for the safety of their loved ones. And my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, and the FCDO teams are working as fast as possible to get our people out of the region. 3 chartered flights have now taken off, with more to come this week. More than 170,000 people have registered their presence, which has allowed us to get them information and support and advice that they need. More than 37,000 British nationals have been evacuated since the start of the crisis response, and as the Prime Minister said last week, we will not stop until our people are safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, these are deeply uncertain times. While we deal with the immediate crisis in the Middle East, we must also maintain our strong support for Ukraine, deter increasing threats in the High North, fulfil our NATO commitments, and ensure our homeland is protected. Our adversaries are watching. We must manage rising demands on defence, balancing resources to best effect. And we must also deal with the cost of living impact this conflict could cause, just as my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has set out in her statement. I'm proud of the UK's response acting at all times in our national interest. We will defend our allies. We will support our armed forces. We will do everything necessary to protect British lives and British interests, to make Britain secure at home and strong abroad. I commend
Shadow Secretary of State, James.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement and the briefing I received from his officials this morning. Can I begin by offering condolences on behalf of the opposition to the 7 US soldiers killed in action as part of their ongoing action against Iran. I join the Secretary of State in utterly condemning Iran's indiscriminate attacks across the region and in expressing my gratitude and that of the opposition to all our brilliant, brave service personnel and their families who are stationed out there. Of course, the Secretary of State and I will agree that the #1 responsibility of any government is to defend its people, and that everything possible must be done to secure our sovereign bases, particularly RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus, attacked by drones a week ago. That is an incredibly serious development. We support the government in taking steps to use the RAF and other assets to protect the airspace and defend against drone and missile threats to Akrotiri, but also in deploying our Air Force to defend allies in the region as an act of collective self-defence. The problem is this. Any serious integrated missile defence plan for the sovereign base areas on Cyprus would by necessity include the presence of one of our highly capable Type 45 air defence destroyers. And yet, despite the Secretary of State just saying, and I quote, since January, he has been moving military assets to the region, there isn't a single Royal Navy warship present, and our Type 45 HMS Dragon hasn't even set sail. Can he confirm that the government only decided last Tuesday to send a Type 45 to the Eastern Med after the US action had already commenced and 2 days after RAF Akrotiri was attacked by kamikaze drones? Of particular importance, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has been widely reported that the Royal Navy recommended to ministers weeks ago to deploy a Type 45 destroyer to the region. Is that true? And if so, when did the Navy make the recommendation to send a Type 45? And which minister took the decision to decline that advice from the Royal Navy and instead choose not to send a destroyer? Who? Most importantly, why was the decision taken not to send a Type 45 until attacks had already taken place against our base on Cyprus? And can the Secretary of State tell us on what date he expects HMS Dragon to be in position to provide air defence in the region? And furthermore, given the Chancellor's promise in her statement just now to reopen the Straits of Hormuz and France's pledge to provide escort ships, what other Royal Naval assets will we be sending to assist? This is the big one. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was on the 19th of February that the BBC reported that the United Kingdom would not allow the United States to use its bases to launch an attack on Iran. We know that 3 US Arleigh Burke destroyers, their equivalent of the Type 45, have for days been based in the Mediterranean, providing Cyprus with defence against ballistic missiles. Doesn't this mean that until the Prime Minister's U-turn a week ago, that this Labour government were displaying the most extraordinary double standards to our closest military ally, on the one hand denying the US the use of our bases, whilst on the other relying on them to protect ours? Exactly. One of the bases in question is Diego Garcia, Madam Deputy Speaker, absolutely critical for launching US heavy bombers. Now, it's bad enough for the Prime Minister to be U-turning over permission to use Diego Garcia whilst it is still our sovereign territory. How much worse will the situation be once we've started paying billions for the pleasure of Mauritius, a close ally of China, to have a say on whether such action complies with international law? So isn't it the case that when it comes to the Prime Minister's next and 17th U-turn, the best thing he could do is to scrap his crazy Chagos deal and spend every penny on the British Armed Forces? But this isn't just about the future of Diego Garcia. Last week, the Cypriot Foreign Minister said, and I quote, "There are questions about the future of the UK's military bases on the island." Isn't the reality that Greece, France and Spain are all sending ships, and that Labour's failure to deploy the Royal Navy to the Eastern Mediterranean has completely undermined our international standing, not just in the eyes of our many allies in the Middle East, but also in the eyes of those who can now exploit such weakness? So can the Secretary of State give his cast iron guarantee that UK sovereignty of our bases on Cyprus is not up for negotiation? Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, it's not just HMS Dragon that everyone is waiting for. At a time of war on multiple fronts, we've now been waiting months and months for the government to publish its long overdue defence investment plan. I cannot emphasise how serious this is. Britain urgently needs to rearm. It was right that we gave a huge amount of munitions to support Ukraine, but that has made our need to rearm even more pressing. Correct. So when exactly is the government going to publish the defence investment plan? Can the Secretary of State at least say if it will be published before local election purdah commences? That is a key question. Finally, isn't there a simple reason why there's no defence investment plan? And isn't it the same reason that for the first time in almost half a century there are no Royal Navy warships in the Middle East? Because when it comes to defence spending, this government has prioritised welfare over rearmament. Yes. They've chosen to spend billions more on benefits rather than strengthening our defence in a dangerous world. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, after all the Prime Minister's dither and delay, U-turns and weakness, will the Secretary of State finally demand from his Chancellor what we all know our armed forces need, a properly funded plan to get to 3% on defence this Parliament?
Secretary of State.
Well, let me start by recognising the fact that he supports the steps that we've taken to put UK defence capabilities into the Middle Eastern region, that his recognition and support for the fact we did this in advance of the current crisis, and these capabilities and our coordination of them have been alongside US allies and have been purely defensive in nature. We have been doing what Britain can best contribute to the protection of British interests, British personnel, British bases and British allies in the region. He asks me about Dragon. Well, we've been building up that significant military presence in the Middle East since January, which he, for the first time, has recognised and welcomed. It is totally right that as circumstances change, so should our military posture. He asks me when this option of Dragon was first put to ministers. As the Chief of the Defence Staff said on the BBC on Saturday, he looked at the proposals for Dragon being deployed to the Middle East on Tuesday last week, and I signed them off the same day. And I say to the right honourable gentleman, if he is unhappy about the state of the British Navy, he should take a hard look at his government's own record. Over 14 years, they hollowed out and underfunded our forces. They cut £12 billion from the defence budget in their first 5 years. Total frigate and destroyer numbers were cut from 23 to 17, and in 14 years in government they didn't order a single new destroyer. Madam Deputy Speaker, we only have Dragon available to go to the Middle East today because the Labour government commissioned it before 2010. And I'm proud of the work our military are doing in the Middle East. I reject claims about the response. We've got ahead of the first strikes in the way that we've said. And I've been unable to find any evidence, in public or in this House, of the Shadow Defence Secretary calling at any stage for military assets to be moved to the Middle East before the war began. Indeed, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, barely a month ago in this House, was saying in this chamber, calling for our military, and I quote, to prioritise or repurpose inventory to contribute to NATO's High North missions. He really is proving himself quite an armchair general. General hindsight, wise only after the event. And I'm really disappointed. He asks about the dip. We're working flat out to produce that. He asked about defence spending. He cut it. We invested in defence. We're rising the greatest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. This year alone, we're spending £62 billion on defence. That is £8 billion more than the last year of their government. And I'm really disappointed, and I tell you our forces are disappointed, that he did not stand up and offer an apology for what his leader said on Friday. His leader's claim that British forces in the Middle East are just hanging around is totally wrong and deeply insulting. They are working flat out in the face of air raid sirens and warnings to protect British lives, protect British interests, protect British allies, and it's time the Tories did the decent thing, apologised for her remarks and withdrew them.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tanmanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Defence Secretary for advance sight of his statement and his operational briefing before. And I also want to pay tribute and praise our armed forces for their bravery, dedication and professionalism to defend our citizens and our allies in the region. I agree with the Defence Secretary that we must urge de-escalation and a return to the negotiation process. And I also am glad that the government pre-positioned Typhoons, F-35s, counter-drone units and other air defence assets into the region. But the lack of a naval presence should be a cause of huge concern for all of us. I appreciate the Secretary of State's comments that our armed forces are significantly overstretched from the high north to further beyond, and that the hollowing out in recent years has meant that we do not have enough assets. But what is being done to urgently rectify the situation and increase the investment into defence in the near future so that we can be in several places all at once?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's support for the action that we've taken, the deployments that I've decided to commit to the region. He asks about what are we doing to make good 14 years of our armed forces being hollowed out and underfunded under the previous government. The first step to is increased defence spending. This year, more than £8 billion greater than the last year that the previous government was in. £270 billion in this Parliament alone, the single biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, and a defence investment plan that will follow up the Strategic Defence Review, a vision and a plan for rebuilding our forces, strengthening our deterrent, integrating our armed forces for the future, and harnessing the accelerating power of new technology, something that I'm grateful to he and his Defence Committee members for supporting and recognising.
Lib Dem spokesperson James McCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement today and echo his praise for the bravery and professionalism of our armed forces putting their lives on their line for us all. The Liberal Democrats continue to have grave concerns about the UK being dragged into Trump's illegal war. However, it is fair to say that the situation has evolved very quickly. So given that it is commonplace for UK personnel to serve aboard US Navy ships, including aircraft carriers like those currently engaged in attacks on Iran, can the Secretary of State provide assurance to this House that no UK personnel are currently serving aboard US Navy ships engaged in offensive operations in the Middle East? Furthermore, there have been serious questions raised about the use of UK bases for US airstrikes. So can the Secretary of State reassure the House on what monitoring is in place to ensure that US actions from UK bases remain purely defensive? And will the government ensure that any intelligence relating to US strikes conducted from UK bases is provided to the Intelligence and Security Committee for review? And if UK bases were used, or proposed to be used for offensive action beyond the government's authority, would the government withdraw permission immediately? Securing these guarantees is essential to ensure that the UK doesn't become complicit in Trump's unilateral and illegal war. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, even if the limited defensive actions carried out being asked for armed forces have exposed the stretched resources really are. So I must press the Secretary of State to give a clear time frame for the release of the Defence Investment Plan to start the urgent task of plugging these gaps. We must make sure that UK forces are given all the tools they need to do the jobs we ask of them, both now and in the future.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said to the House in my statement, all decisions that we've taken, all actions in the face of this current conflict have been defensive in nature and legally well-based. That gives a sound foundation for ministers' decisions. It gives the forces personnel the fullest confidence in the actions they're taking. That is true of those that we've got deployed in the region. It will be true of those that we have embedded, I'm proud to say, in the US forces around the world. And I'm proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, that our US-UK relationship remains deep and close, and that we continue to do things together that no other nations will do.
Emma Lewell. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State is right that our armed forces are the very best of us. Australian and British media are reporting that HMS Anson has departed Western Australia ahead of schedule. Can my right honourable friend indicate whether HMS Anson will play a role in defending British interests in the region on her voyage home?
Madam Deputy Speaker, there are certain things that I will not and cannot disclose publicly, and the operations of our submarines fall into that category. My honourable friend is a long-standing member of the Defence Select Committee. I know she will understand the sensitivity and the potency of our submarine fleet. I know she asks the question, but she cannot realistically and reasonably expect the answer, and I know she knows that.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement? At that dispatch box about half an hour ago, perhaps unwisely, the Chancellor of the Exchequer delved into the world of military strategy, and she said a couple of things which were slightly alarming. Firstly, she upbraided, actually, the Shadow Chancellor for not calling for the de-escalation of the operations against Iran, and yet the Defence Secretary's own statement only mentions de-escalation when it comes to the situation in Lebanon. So could he just clarify whether he is calling on his American counterparts to de-escalate in Iran or not? And secondly, she said that in order to open the Straits of Hormuz, we would need to support something she called cross-country operations with France and the US, and that we were ready to do that to open the Straits of Hormuz. Could he comment on that too, please?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we as the UK Government are urging Iran to de-escalate. We are deeply concerned about regional stability, and part of the reason for our coordinated defensive actions, the contribution that we're making in the regional coordination centres, but also with our jets flying in defence of Middle Eastern allies, is to reinforce regional security and stability. Now, my honourable friend, the Chancellor, made an important statement this afternoon and included the commitment that she can confirm she'd approved for the Ministry of Defence access to the Special Reserve to deploy additional capabilities as they're needed to the Middle East. I'm sure the House will welcome that, as they will welcome the fact that she said, I'm committed to giving our military the resources they need.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's leadership at this time. One of the defining characteristics of the UK's response to the crisis when Russia full-scale invaded Ukraine in 2022 was the political unity that this party offered our country in that response. So does my right honourable friend find it extremely disappointing to find the Leader of the Opposition saying that our military are hanging around when they are putting themselves in harm's way to defend our interests abroad? And does he expect, like I do, the opposition Secretary of State to perhaps apologise for that really disappointing, cheap political point scoring?
My honourable friend is entirely right. When I had the honour of spending part of Thursday with our personnel on our base in Akrotiri, it wasn't just the teams and the pilots flying the fast jets that are working flat out. The F-35 team I spoke to had deployed at 5 days' notice to Cyprus. It was the whole military personnel on that base, including those looking after and ensuring the relocation of non-essential personnel and families to hotels in the Pathos area. Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be more insulting than the suggestion that they're simply hanging around in the Middle East. And I really would like to hear, we didn't hear it from the Shadow Defence Secretary, any of the honourable members on the benches opposite contest what their leader has said, apologise on her behalf, and let's have the sort of support that recognises our armed forces are in the region to protect British personnel, to protect British bases, to protect British interests, and we're proud that they're doing that job.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I'm not particularly keen on the tone of these exchanges, so may I make a positive suggestion to the Secretary of State? We've heard that Ukraine has offered to assist the United States with its specialized version of anti-Iranian drone technology. Yep. These weapons for bringing down Iranian drones are much cheaper than the drones themselves, whereas the weapons which the Americans and ourselves generally use are much more expensive. Given the difficult relationship between Zelensky and Trump, does the Secretary of State agree that there is a role here for Britain, with its high standing in Ukraine, to see if we can't make a start by acquiring from Ukraine some of these weapons, which we can use in defence of our own bases, and which may then pave the way for a deal between Trump and Zelensky for the wider benefit of the whole theatre?
Madam Deputy Speaker, if we take this one step at a time, and I appreciate the Right Honourable Gentleman's suggestion and the tone in which he offers his thoughts. First of all, he, like I, will welcome President Zelensky's declaration that Ukraine stands ready and is offering their experience and their expertise to Gulf states facing many of the same Shahid Iranian drones. We are playing our part. We have the Defence Special Advisor for the Middle East at the moment doing a series of visits to 9 Gulf countries with a team that includes British experts in the Ukrainian fight against Putin's invasion and the technologies they've been using in order to defeat many of Putin's developments and drones. And the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry is also talking to British firms about the contribution that they could make to supplying the reinforced defences that our Middle Eastern partners so badly need.
Please, can I encourage members to ask short questions and the Secretary of State to give briefer answers. Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I shed no tears for the demise of an Iranian regime which murdered and repressed tens of thousands of its own citizens, particularly women. But I'm proud that this government has not joined the US and Israel in this reckless war, which lacks a clear plan and which is hitting my constituents in the pocket and is threatening the global economy. Given that this government has its own independent foreign policy, it's not the handmaiden of Washington, as the Tories would want it, and nor is it the poodle of Putin, as Reform are. But can the Defence Secretary now tell me how important it is that the Chancellor is providing new funds for our armed forces who are defending British interests and British citizens in the region?
I do indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is right to underline the statement and the commitment the Chancellor made this afternoon to this House. He's also right to point out that the US may be our closest ally, but as the Prime Minister has said, it is for the Prime Minister and the British government to decide what is in Britain's best national interests.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I listened very carefully to what he had to say about the authorisation of the US using UK bases and his confirmation that there are UK personnel embedded with US operations in the region. With that in mind, it seems all the more important that this government is entirely clear on the limits of the consent it has given to operating with the US. Defence Secretary Hesketh on Monday last week mocked the idea of rules of engagement and said he wanted to seek, and I quote, maximum lethality. President Trump then on Saturday said that new areas and groups of people would be under serious consideration for complete destruction. What confidence does the Secretary of State have that the US are following the same rules of engagement that he believes are legal for the UK?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have the fullest confidence. These arrangements for access, basing and overflight are well established. The relations between the US and the UK are very close. We have operated these together before. We are doing so now.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for all that he is doing to support our troops in the region and protect British citizens? It is clear that a long conflict would pose real risks not only to them but also to energy prices and the cost of living here in the UK. So can I ask him, does he agree that we need to see urgent de-escalation and a reduction in tensions across the region? And does he share my concern that the Conservatives and Reform would see us dragged into a conflict that can have such devastating consequences for British lives and livelihoods?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend makes important points, and when the first concern of this government, and I welcome his support for this, is the protection of British personnel, British citizens in the wider Middle East, our bases and our allies. I know he will support the action that we've taken, both before this current conflict broke out and in the week or so since. Thank you.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't the problem here not our military capability? We still have the second most capable navy in NATO. It is political will. Why is it that HMS Duncan is alongside in Portsmouth, having spent the summer in a maintenance period, the sister ship of HMS Dragon? She has been up and ready to go for weeks. And why is it the case that she wasn't sent at the beginning of this crisis?
Secretary of State.
Well, the honourable gentleman's another former minister in the previous government in the Defence Department. He knows all about the decisions that have left our Navy in the state that it's in now. But he will also appreciate that we've taken decisions to deploy the things that Britain can best put into the region to protect our allies and to protect our people, both military and civilian. He will recognise and applaud the fact that because of that, from day one, our fast jets have been flying defensive operations in coordination with our allies and our US colleagues, and that where the circumstances change, we will adapt the action and the decisions that we take, which is just what we've done from the point that we saw the indiscriminate extent of the Iranian response last Saturday.
Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iran has a network of proxies and lone actors who threaten security here at home. Will the Minister join me in thanking all the volunteers of the Community Security Trust who protect our Jewish places of worship and schools? Never have they been more crucial.
I will indeed. My honourable friend is right. The Community Security Trust does extraordinary work in very difficult times and is responding to deep unease and deep concern and in some cases serious fears amongst the Jewish community in this country.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first say that I don't know of anybody on these benches that would not wish to associate themselves with the Secretary of State's praise for the courage and determination of our armed services, both worldwide and particularly in Cyprus. I have to declare an interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, as an honorary citizen of Cyprus. The Republic of Cyprus has maintained a principled neutrality, and that has served British nationals and others well over many years. Akrotiri is based exactly almost between Paphos and Larnaca. It's a very difficult situation for the Secretary of State to square. Could he tell the House what steps will be taken to protect those many British nationals resident in Cyprus and those many other British visitors who hitherto have gone to the island for their holidays?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman's remarks about our armed forces, and I will ensure that those are passed on. I hadn't realised he was an honorary citizen of Cyprus, and I hope he will appreciate in my statement I confirmed that the head of the National Guard confirms that cooperation between our militaries has never been closer, and I hope he'll appreciate that the defensive capabilities and activities that we are running from Akrotiri are part not just of defending our base, but defending our people right across Cyprus and the island of Cyprus itself. And from that island, we can also and are help defend regional allies.
Alex Baker. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to say thank you to the Secretary of State for everything that he is doing to support all of my constituents in the region and keep them safe. I know that he and I share a priority that we need to get our serving personnel the capabilities that they need. In the light of the movements we have seen today in the gilt and the bond markets, which underline the pressure of governments to finance increased defence spending, does the Secretary of State agree that we should explore innovative multilateral financing mechanisms, such as the Defence Security and Resilience Bank, to help unlock the capital our defence industrial base needs to grow?
I do, and we are. And my honourable friend will also have noted the Prime Minister's important speech in the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago, when he recognised in this new era of threats that we face, this is now an era of hard power, and that he has recognised the need to spend more and faster on defence.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I visited the UK-US Bahrain base at the end of last year, and on the 5th of January this year in the Venezuela statement, I said that we were exposed in Bahrain with the naval assets. The Secretary of State has rightly said from the January they've ramped up the UK presence over there. If last Tuesday was the first that the Chief of the Defence Staff saw a request for naval assets to go to that region, what has gone wrong during that time, and is this a strategic failure to take that long to put those assets on that desk?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've explained to the House the range of defensive capabilities that we put into the region ahead of this current conflict. When we saw the scale of the Iranian reaction to the strikes, the retaliation from Saturday onwards, it was clear we needed to do more, and I have, and I've explained that to the House. I've also explained that these aren't just British defensive assets deployed on a fully legal basis. These are deployed in full coordination with our US and other allies. And HMS Dragon, as I've explained, will take up its position in the Eastern Mediterranean alongside other defensive destroyers that the US has already deployed in the area.
Alex Ballinger.
Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Secretary of State laments the state of our Royal Navy, but he will remember that it was his party that cut investment in our Royal Navy over 14 years, cut the size of the number of warships we had by 25%, and ordered no new destroyers in that period either. So does the Secretary of State agree that we should be investing in our Navy, but we should take no lessons from the party opposite that set up our Navy ready to fail in the situation we're in now?
I do agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my honourable friend, and we are, just as we are increasing the defence investment across the board, including in the munitions that we need when we're faced with conflicts like this.
Members will have noticed that there's still a lot of people on their feet. I'm aiming to finish this statement around 1:15. I call Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State made the distinction between permitting the use of British bases for offensive and defensive action. I understand the need to protect and defend British citizens in the Middle East, But can the Secretary of State explain how he is seeking to maintain this distinction between offensive and defensive action, given it would require a degree of control over US military activity that the British government may not possess?
Well, the honourable gentleman is a military man by experience. He will understand the nature of the agreements, the requests that nations make of each other, the agreements that they put in place and how those work. Access, basing, overflights, which is exactly the request that we had when it was clear the Iranian response to the first wave of attacks took us into a new phase. That was a request from the US that we allow US bombers to operate from Fairford and Diego Garcia for specific defensive purposes, and that is to take out the Iranian missile positions, and that's what they are doing.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was a Conservative 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review and subsequent basing review that took the Royal Navy's repair facilities from 3 to 1. An utterly reckless decision that was made worse when you knew of the power plant problems for Type 45, which you created an internal competition for the limited resource, Madam Deputy Speaker, that they created for the Royal Navy. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it was both reckless Tory risk-taking which left the Royal Navy in this precarious situation?
Questions have to be shorter. Secretary of State.
I do agree with my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker. He speaks with the authority of someone who was serving at the time in 2010, when in that first year they cut £2 billion from the defence budget, and in those first 5 years they cut £12 billion from defence. They underfunded and hollowed out our armed forces over 14 years.
Ben Objecting.
The appointment of HMS Dragon means that we've left a gap in our commitment to be the flagship of the NATO Standing Naval Maritime Group 1 commitment. HMS Duncan's already tasked to go on Operational Firecrest to the High North, and HMS Dauntless is still in the fleet time support period. So can the Secretary of State guarantee that we will be able to fulfil our commitment to NATO in providing the flagship role, and can he guarantee that it will be provided by a British ship?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to announce in advance the deployments that the British forces make. He's right to point to the balance of threats and responsibilities that we have to manage. We are doing that, and we will always fulfil our NATO commitments.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for everything he's doing in Britain's national interest. But our armed forces cannot believe their ears, with the leader of the opposition saying that they're hanging around doing nothing, and the honourable member for Clacton swanning off to the States to tell Donald Trump that if he were Prime Minister, he'd blindly follow the US defence policy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the first duty of any Prime Minister and any Secretary of State for Defence is our national interest, the Britain's national interest, and not anything else?
The first duty of any government is to defend the country, to pursue our national interest and to support our armed forces. On this occasion, we had expected and we looked for better from the Leader of the Opposition.
Chard.
I've only been in the House 21 years, but whenever we talk about defence and when our armed forces are in harm's way, I have to say a blame game on either side is not going to save a single life. And whilst we all want to see de-escalation, I think the government, I hope, will have learnt lessons in the last few weeks and months to prepare for escalation. So is the Defence Secretary aware of the 2024 report by the US Director of National Intelligence that underlines the stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons that Iran holds? And would he work with friends and allies in the region and with the new Syrian government to identify those stockpiles and deal with them? And finally, on Akrotiri and other bases in the region, to ensure that our armed forces personnel and their families are given the right protective CBRN kit?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am aware of the 2024 report that he cites. We are aware of those risks, and I say to the House, the Right Honourable Gentleman puts his 21 years as a member of this House to good effect in the comments that he makes this afternoon.
Imran Hussain.
Mr. Speaker, we should be deeply alarmed at the sight of US bomber jets arriving at UK military bases ahead of joining President Trump bombing Iran. These attacks violate international law. The suggestion that these aircraft would be used only for defensive purposes is frankly absurd. Their deployment risks dragging Britain into unlawful attacks and the loss of further civilian life. So can the Minister explain what assurances he can give this House that UK bases will not be used to facilitate further unlawful attacks and that Britain will not be dragged deeper into an illegal war that the majority of the British public do not support?
British bases will be used by American aircraft for fully lawful defensive purposes spelt out in the agreement that we have with the US, and that is to destroy Iranians' missile bases that are holding such indiscriminate risk and threat to our personnel and our allies in the region.
Savile Roberts.
Protecting livelihoods and limiting the cost of living hit both depend on President Trump ending his war of choice. I doubt whether he cares a jot about the damage he's doing to our economy, but he does care about his poll numbers. By bringing this crisis to a speedy conclusion.
Mohammed Yazin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, US and deeper instability. Over a thousand of civilians stranded, and the shock to fuel prices or to join this illegal war. But will the Secretary of State hold the to defend British citizens and national security with an international without the consent of this House?
In my statement and in response to other questions are based, those are principles that will continue to inform may change.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
He has my full support and my respect, as he knows. But I do want to ask the government backbenchers that somehow the government has kept them out of this war because we are in the firing line in our bases and our allies. Moves and the necessity of taking action where it's applicable, and take action against threats to all tankers and other facilities.
Madam Deputy Speaker, British interests and British personnel and British civilians at risk. He puts it in the firing line, and I'm incredibly our bases and each other, but to protect of defensive operations that help keep the Middle East safe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Targeting of RAF aggression against the United Kingdom The Iranian regime has repeatedly shown its fronts. May I ask what steps the Secretary of State is taking with threat to Britons abroad and here in the UK?
Citizens in the region at present, which is why to advise and help Britain bring Brits back. My priority is to protecting the allies that we've got in the region. Our British citizens have friends and family that may be stranded in the Middle East. Our armed forces are playing in doing just that.
Rebecca.
Base.
Hi, Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean no discourtesy to the Secretary of State, but there was an omission in his statement, a statement the last 10 minutes, and that was the murder of 165 young children at a school. And that target, allegedly, by a Tomahawk cruise missile and a double-tack strike. This government talks about calling out war crimes, in particular violence against women and girls. This does very little in trying to support that proposition. Will the Secretary of State condemn that attack? And would he like to explain what he has done in terms of talking to his alleged allies about this particular
Secretary of State. Well, the Honourable Gentleman will note, of course, we only have the reports from the Iranian regime about that strike, and he will be aware that the US is looking into this at present.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do want to start by paying tribute to Edinburgh's Iranian community. Despite being concerned about their family in Iran, they've taken time in the past week to host public events which share details of Iran's rich culture and also, I have to say, the barbaric nature of its regime. But I do want to ask a question about HMS Dragon, when I think the maths is quite clear. The ship cost £1 billion. The party opposite cut the defence budget by £14 billion. Surely, Secretary of State, if the party opposite wants to see more destroyers in the Mediterranean, they should have built the things.
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend is right to pay tribute to the Iranian community in his home city of Edinburgh, and I reinforce and echo his comments. He's also right, of course, about the party opposite. 14 years and they didn't commission a single new destroyer, and we only have HMS Dragon set to sail this week in the next couple of days because it was commissioned by the previous Labour government.
Final question, Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trump and Netanyahu's illegal war on this Iranian regime has shocked and disgusted our constituents, just like the Iranian regime's crackdowns on opposition protests for decades. The horrors that we've seen reinforce the feeling in this country that international events are happening to us, and since Brexit and since Trump re-entered the White House, we have much less say in our future and our security. So can I ask the Minister if he will listen to Liberal Democrat calls to empower us to take back control of our fate by issuing defence bonds to raise the cash we need to meet our defence spending, but also rebuild our place in Europe with deeper cooperation with our European neighbours to reduce our dependence on the mad king in the White House.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm always interested in ways of getting more funding into defence, and it's one of the reasons that I've laid such stress, not just on the record increase of defence investment that this government is making from the public purse, but ways that we can also leverage that with investment from private sources. And it's why we've got a defence finance advisory group that will shortly set out their report with proposals that we can pursue on that too.
Point of order. That concludes the statement. Point of order, Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at the end of the first statement, it was indicated from the Chair that those who were not called on that statement would be prioritised in respect of this second statement. Did that happen? No. And if so, why not?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. There has been a degree of prioritisation, but no guarantee. I am sure he understands that the time pressures on this chamber are sometimes absolutely impossible. With 3 government statements and an important debate, it is just impossible. We now come to the next statement. I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over. We now begin the next statement. Statement, Secretary of State, Steve Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I'll make a statement on the Government's action plan for social cohesion entitled Protecting What Matters. Britain has faced global crises at many moments in our history, and we got through them by staying strong and united. Today, we navigate new threats to our communities and families, and we must stand together once again against those who seek to divide and weaken us. They want to sow division in our streets, our neighbourhoods, our homes, and in our minds. They feed off deliberate misinformation, hatred, and extremism, carried across social media by algorithms and funded by hostile states and rogue billionaires determined to pull our communities apart. Online echo chambers, hatred for those with a different point of view, and unwillingness to seek compromise have led to a politics more aggressive, polarised and toxic than we've seen before, certainly in our lifetimes. As a nation, we are proof that people from different backgrounds can live, work and contribute together. A multi-ethnic democracy where neighbours look out for each other. But the foundations on which this country was built have been rocked by the rapid change all around us. Economic shocks and austerity halted the once steady improvement in our living standards. Rapid technological change has transformed how we work and live our lives. Intergenerational unfairness, regional inequality, an ageing population, the Tory open borders experiment and the disruption caused by their asylum seeker hotels policy. All of this has left communities more fearful of the future and more susceptible to siren voices wrongly putting the blame on minority groups. Today, through the publication of Protecting What Matters, which we've laid as a command paper in both houses this afternoon, we set out our steps towards a more confident, cohesive and united kingdom. Patriotism means bringing our country together, never pulling it apart. It's not patriotic to target someone because of their religion or the colour of their skin. We will resist those who peddle that kind of hatred and division. We choose to celebrate our country and all it stands for. We choose to come together in the best of times and the worst of times. We choose to take on those who seek to divide us. That is patriotism. Our action plan aims to build confident communities that have hope in the future. There is a direct link between declining high streets and a sense that the country is going backwards. People remember high streets from years gone by that were vibrant, buzzy, great places to socialise with friends and family. There's a real sense of anger as well as of loss that so many have been left boarded up and run down, covered in graffiti, full of dumped rubbish, bleak symbols of the wasted Tory years. People deserve to feel proud of their neighbourhood, and pride in place is central to our plan to make that happen. We have now committed £5.8 billion to almost 300 constituencies and begun to set up neighbourhood boards so local people can decide for themselves how that money is spent. Fair funding for councils means funding now follows deprivation for the first time in over a decade. We're offering grassroots organisations £5 million through the Common Ground Fund to tackle division in communities. We'll focus too on protecting young people from those who want to warp their minds with hatred and introduce more effective regulation of home education. The first ever register of children not in school, stronger oversight where children may be at risk, and piloting a new approach where new safety checks are carried out before a child can be taken out of mainstream schooling. It's important children grow up understanding the diversity of our nation, so we're investing £500,000 to link schools serving different communities to make sure they know and understand each other better. We will establish a social cohesion measurement framework so we can identify risks early and act quickly. We'll set expectation on integration for new arrivals and the communities that will receive them, with a focus on learning English so people have a shared language, can participate in the local community and have respect for British values, our democracy and our way of life. We will end the Tory asylum hotels policy and shape an immigration system that is fair and transparent and works better for all communities. We will not allow hatred to distort the lives and life chances of those who are targeted. Right now, Muslim communities are facing shocking levels of abuse. Anti-Muslim hate crimes are at record levels, and they now make up almost half of all religious hate crimes, way out of proportion to the size of our Muslim population. Mosques, schools and businesses have been attacked, women harassed, families are living in fear. We have a duty to act, but you can't tackle a problem if you can't describe it. So today we are adopting a non-statutory definition of anti-Muslim hostility. This gives a clear explanation of unacceptable prejudice, discrimination and hatred targeting Muslims so we can take action to stop it. The definition safeguards our fundamental right to freedom of speech about religion in general or any religion in particular, and ensures that concerns raised in the public interest are protected. I want to thank the members of the independent working group chaired by Dominic Reeves who have provided advice to the government on this matter. They have themselves been targets for abuse because they carried out this work, and that is utterly unacceptable. I am grateful for their patience and their wisdom. We will now work with groups across society to consider how this definition can be used most effectively and what comes next in disseminating it. And we've deposited a copy of the definition in the libraries of both houses. We also remain absolutely committed to stamping out anti-Semitism. We have witnessed murderous anti-Semitic terrorist attacks, both here in the UK and abroad. Sickeningly, this led to spikes in anti-Semitic abuse. Since coming to power, this government has taken decisive steps to combat anti-Semitism,